G'day ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Draw with Jazza. I'm Jazza and this is a video tutorial on getting the best lines possible in whatever situation you're in. Now, the focus is going to be on tablets. So most of this applies exclusively to tablets and using programs like Photoshop and Adobe Flash. Now, I'm going to be using Flash in this tutorial because of the vector being a bit trickier to work with in terms of doing lines. And I get the question very often, how do you get smooth lines, right? So I figured rather than just kind of text answer individually, I'd make this tutorial to show a few of the things that I've kind of adapted to over time personally. So the first things first, pressure sensitivity. Tablets have, if they're decent tablets, inbuilt pressure sensitivity. If you're looking for good tablets, I recommend Wacom. They're kind of an industry standard. I'm sure there are others out there. You can get good pad tablets for maybe $100 or so on eBay if you look there. I'm not entirely sure. I haven't looked at the market myself lately, but you know, there's gonna be some good stuff. But any good tablet will have a driver that is compatible with your software. Now, in Flash, you can see here on the left panel, when I hit brush, right? So if I select the brush, there's these extra few tools that show up at the bottom, and one of them is the use pressure button. So if you have a tablet and you're using it and you're getting these lines where it's like, let's say you draw really lightly and it's not a thin line, I'll use a bigger brush to give a better example, the line doesn't change, right? So if I write high, it's all this one yucky sort of shape and size. Whereas if I hit use pressure, if it's compatible with my tablet's driver, all of a sudden, when I write high, I get different thicknesses based on how thick my pen is going. Like, for example, without pressure, if I wanted to do one of these curvy things, it ends up looking like that. With pressure, even with a really thick brush, I can end up doing really quite thin lines in comparison. So that's the first thing. Now, Photoshop also has a pressure sensitivity toggle selection up at the top tools when you have brush selected. So make sure that that's selected when you use a tablet in Photoshop. So the next thing is the brush smoothing setting, and this is exclusive to Flash. Now, I'm going to explain in a little more detail than I would normally how this works. I have my default brush smoothness, so when I selected my brush, you can see on the left here in the properties panel, and it can be elsewhere in your own UI, but in the properties panel, I have the smoothing set to 50. So if I write high, just like I did before, right, oops, sorry. The smoothing is essentially how the program calculates to correct, you know, motions and quivers in the hand. When I say calculates, drawing in Flash in vector is a little different to bitmap drawing, because you can zoom in as much as you want and it's more like a mathematical image than it is a bitmap image. Vector is more about, you know, those calculations. So if I change the smoothness, let's say to 5, hit enter, and then write the same thing over here, you'll notice if I zoom in, things are looking really, really shabby, right? So same thing, let's go on the other extreme. Let's move this smoothness up to 100. If I go over the right here and write high, it's really, really too simplified. It doesn't really hold any of its own shape. Now I'm going to show you what this is actually doing. Over here, there's a selection tool where if you hit A and you select your brush area, you can see all these little dots around the brush line that I drew. All those little dots are called vectors. So if I move one of them, or two of them, it pulls out those vectors and changes the shape, right? So when you have the smoothness to a minimum, it removes a lot of the smoothing between vectors, in essence adding a lot more so that the lines end up holding a lot of the inconsistencies of your hand. In the other extreme example, if I hit my vector selection tool, you can see that there's very few, to the point where it oversimplifies the shape. Now, it's the Goldilocks Syndrome. Everyone needs to find what they're comfortable with. Some people would need less smoothing so that they have a little more, you know, organic looking line. Some people might really want that really sharp vector look, but I go for the middle, which is this, and there's not too many more vectors than the extremely smoothed version. But it's the middle ground, it's the Goldilocks thing. So I have my default smoothing in Flash to 50. The next thing is undoing. This has got to become a habit, basically. There's no other way to put it. I'm going to draw this. I've got my construction work here on the left and right. I'm going to draw on the left the fist as I would like to draw it in the final product without hitting undo for any of the lines, right? So, and I'm not going to try and be too hasty or anything. I'm going to try and draw, you know, proper lines. Just kind of go through. Shouldn't take too long. Adding the... Oh, see, even just then, my hand moved there to press Control Z, and I'm like, no, that's the whole point of doing this. Okay. So that is my hand without hitting undo once, right? Now watch the difference as I go through and draw the hand, but with a willingness, to hit undo as the lines don't work for me, okay? Oops. And if you go through and watch my other tutorials, you'll notice that I do it a lot. Even when drawing simple things to demonstrate a completely different point, I spend a lot of time undoing and redoing the lines I draw. Now, a part of this process, like let's say I draw a line that's not exactly the way I want it, but it's really close. I often wouldn't undo that and I'll just tweak it, right? So for example, with this thumb here, if I wanted to add a little thickness there, or you know, there's like a tiny bit poking out like this, see how I drew that and there's that bulge there? Rather than redrawing the whole thing, I'll just pull that up. But we'll go into that later. That's a refinement process. And then we have the final product. Okay. Now, there's not a huge difference. Okay. If I hide my construction work, you can see though that the example on the right is much more solid and held together. The lines over here are broken apart because they don't often start in the right places. Over here, when I undo and redo to make sure that the lines connect properly and that they sit with a good thickness, the ending result is much better. So that's something to keep in mind as well. Next is stroke technique. Now this takes in a few things. This is in essence how your hand moves with the pencil or the Wacom pen. This applies to sketching with, you know, pen and paper as well. It's just a little more applicable digitally. All right. So first things first, pressure. If I'm drawing over this example that I just randomly Googled here, so I hope I'm not infringing someone's copyright. I probably am. We can see that they've got thicker lines and thinner lines. So if I'm drawing the thicker lines, I want to make sure to push harder than I would if drawing the thinner lines. And we've just kind of got to get used to transitioning between them. So I've got the thicker outlines of the hair in these areas, and then when I want to go through and add the details, you really just kind of got to have a, oops, I'm just trying to put this in, kind of got to have a good grasp of the feeling of how the lines draw. So here I'm like barely touching, see, you can, okay, that brings up another point. I just redid that line a few times. See what's happening there, right? I'm drawing a really lightly touching line here, and it does these bulges, okay? Now, people can get very frustrated with this. A solution is to split your line apart, okay? So do part of the line here, like a small, whoops, thin curve, then bring it around like that, okay? So that's the other part, is length, okay? So as an example, I'm gonna draw along this wave of hair in one stroke. And what that's done is it has bulges in some areas, and it has nothing in this area here, or really thin here, you know, and that is not what we want. But if I undo that and break it up into this curve, then do another line for this curve, and I can tweak this by pulling it in on both sides just a little bit. Oops. Okay, so I'll undo that and redo that. So do this curve. Makes it really frustrating when you try and demonstrating a process and you can't get it right. But it goes to show how persistent and patient you need to be with the lines. because a nicely drawn vector line can end up looking really nice. So you can see there, in drawing 3 different line sections, the line width and consistency is much smoother, okay? Now, the other thing is stability. That goes in line with the length, okay? So if I'm drawing here, again, another curve, that's an unstable line because it fluctuates. So by breaking it up into smaller parts, like this, whoops. I think when you do more than one extreme curve with a brush tool in Flash, it just has a hard time calculating how the end result will look, okay? So you can see there, it takes a lot of fiddling about. I did my Control-Z undo redo thing maybe 5 to 10 times with some of those sections because it just wasn't getting it right. It's frustrating, but you get used to it, frankly, okay? So that's that part. The next thing is zoom for detail. Now, I did that naturally just before anyway, okay? So let's say I'm doing the eyes here, okay? And I want to get those eyelashes really, really nicely done. If I kind of stay at this distance and draw the eye, see the basic shape of the eye is pretty easy to get right. The colors and, well, there's no colors, what am I talking about? Okay, but these eyelashes here, if I wanted to make them look really sort of individual and, you know, we get this sort of chunky look. But if I zoom in and bring my brush up a size, all of a sudden I can get some really nice looking lines, okay? Now this is the same in Photoshop, particularly more so in Flash because the brush sizes don't scale and it's a little more finicky. But yeah, it's the same thing. If you're zoomed out, let's say I'm gonna draw the other line with a smaller brush size at a distance, and you can see that it's barely even picking up or registering the tiny, tiny movements my hand makes. So you can see the difference between this and this. Yep. So that's that bit of the lesson. I'm just going to delete that because it looks completely hideous. Okay. And the last part of my example is refinement. Now, as I'd mentioned that I'd go into later, if I'm drawing a line and things go slightly wrong, part of the process is refining, okay? So let's say, for example, this strand of hair along here, okay? If I zoom in here, you can see that there are a few little jagged bits, okay? Now, in general, I like the thickness of the line. I like how that's turned out. But there are a few things that I don't like about it. So what we do is we're basically, if I hit my vector selection thing, we can see where things meet up and where things go wrong. And I can tweak some of these vectors manually and, you know, edit my thicknesses, connect areas together. Now, doing it like this is quite finicky. Some people like doing it so individually focused. I personally don't. I prefer to do it this way by having V selected, which is just, if I select it, it just selects the whole line. And if I mouse over areas of that line, you can see there's the mouse with a little curve on it, and then there's the mouse with a little angle on it. So if I pull one with the curve, I pull out the curve like that. Okay, so I can refine that curve by mouse overing where that curve shows and tweaking little bits. If I find where there's the angle, I'm pulling a point, a vector point. So what I do when I refine, if I screw up a line, I go through and I just kind of feel my way through the points and the curves by doing little tweaks. And by doing that, in the end, we get a line that looks much more drawn together and organic. So, oops, I'm going to zoom out in a moment to show you how that turned out. Now, this is a very sort of rushed example, but you can see how that hair has less jagged bits in it. But, you know, you get the basic idea of what I'm trying to show you. If I were to do the same thing with a thicker line meeting another line, so let's say the line of the shoulder here, and then the rest of the outline of the face. Oops. See, undo, redo. You can see me doing all the things I'm talking about. I need a smaller brush size. I need to break apart my lines. And undo, redo. Okay, so let's say I've got the basic look right, it needs some tweaking, okay? Because it's thick here, and weird in the middle. So I'm just gonna pull that up here. I'm going to pull the edge of this. What you can do is you can pull, like, let's say here, I've got this edge. You can kind of pull it around itself to delete itself. So if I do that, all of a sudden that edge is gone, okay? It's something that you get used to over time. I'll remove the thickness in that area just by pulling it in. Same here. Now you can't do this in bitmap editing programs like Photoshop, which is why I personally prefer Flash for designing sort of products and characters and, you know, things that you want to kind of end up looking really smooth. Whereas with bitmap or raster editing, sorry, it's not as simple as that. So now when I zoom out, you can see that I really refine that line just by moving a few little vectors. Okay, I hope this tutorial has been helpful. I knew it would just kind of be a quick one, but I get the question a lot, and they're just a few things that you can keep in mind to help make your final product a little more final.
Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe if you enjoy my videos. You can download the reference files from this tutorial by clicking the link in the description. And remember to share any art, animation or game you make on Newgrounds.com. Until next time, see you later.